From entire bridge collapses to national tragedy, today we look at 11 crazy engineering fails. 11. The Burj Khalifa. Dubai seems to be a boomtown in the last decade, but there's a bit of a seedy underside which many people don't know about. Behind the flashy cars, huge towers, and rich super residents, there are some serious problems with some of the buildings, which can only be the result of rushing to finish them and impress the world. A great example of this is the Burj Khalifa, a building which currently holds the title of tallest building in the world, and was intended to be an example of what the Middle East can accomplish. The building is too large for the city's sewage system to adequately handle its needs. So currently, the waste produced by the 35,000 residents of the building is trucked out each and every day, to the tune of about 7 tons per trip. This is pretty crazy to consider, since the Burj Khalifa is supposed to be a shining beacon of modern architectural accomplishment. 10. Tacoma Narrows Bridge. The curious case of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge is something that any structural engineer and architect would do well to read about. Originally built in July of 1940, the bridge collapsed a mere 4 months later, when winds hitting the bridge caused it to twist and buckle in a way never seen before. Though the engineers expected some flexing due to wind, they deemed the bridge safe to use and proceeded to open it to the public. On November 7th, the wind caused the bridge to flex and twist so dramatically that it tore itself apart. Though no human life was lost in the collapse, a dog did perish as a result when its master's car was abandoned on the bridge. The dog was too terrified to leave the vehicle and had to be left behind. Footage from the disaster has become some of the most famous disaster footage of all time, and it still teaches structural engineering students important lessons to this day. 9. Walt Disney Concert Hall. The Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, California was designed by Frank Gehry in 1991 and opened in 2003. The project started in 1987 with a $50 million donation by Lillian Disney, the widow of Walt Disney. All told, the project cost an estimated $274 million to complete. While the building was definitely beautiful, an unfortunate side effect of its polished metal skin was that it would reflect the sunlight to such an insane degree that the glare was blinding. The solution was as costly as it was sad. For $180,000, the exterior of the building was sunblasted in the area which produced the glare. This removed the shiny exterior in that area and greatly reduced the glare, which was apparently so excessive that it drew comparisons to tanning mirrors, and the neighborhood residents complained of increased temperatures. 8. The Titanic. Few of man's achievements speak of the results of hubris better than the story of the RMS Titanic. It's likely you already know the overarching story of what happened, but what you may not know is the series of failures which led to the tremendous loss of life involved in the sinking of the ship. Firstly, the ship was touted as unsinkable, and this was mainly due to a new system of 16 separate watertight compartments which were supposed to be able to seal off from one another instantly in the event of failure. Additionally, the ship carried 20 lifeboats, which each carried between 40 and 47 people. These were meant to be able to spirit away the ship's passengers in the event of a true disaster. However, not only did the bulkhead system fail to stop the ship from flooding with water, but there were not enough boats to save all the passengers. Additionally, since the ship was seen as unsinkable, the crew was not fully trained in evacuation procedures. 7. Flying car. Back in the 70s, the dream of the flying car we were promised in the Jetsons was still alive and well. This was also a time of huge boom in the auto industry, and for the first time in, well, ever, virtually everyone was able to afford a car. The end result was a whole lot of competition to get the first flying car in the air, since that was seen at the time as the next big step in the American dream. Enter the Mizar, which was a strange convertible craft which could be used as both an airplane and a car. The design was created by Henry Smolinski and was based around the Ford Pinto, which of course was already its own disaster waiting to happen. The Mizar's aircraft components could be quickly added onto or removed from the Pinto to convert it to either of its modes. The airplane attachment had its own engine, and this would be used in tandem with the car's engine to achieve liftoff. While the design seemed sound, the real-world tests indicated disaster straight from the start. Struts and mounting attachments failed, and turning the aircraft could put enough stress on the machine to rip the wings off. After making some modifications, Smolinski and business partner Hal Blake took the plane up, and it ripped itself apart and crashed, killing both men instantly. 6. Shanghai building collapse. It's not exactly rare for a building to collapse. However, it's pretty strange for a building to fall over in one piece. That's what happened to a 13-story apartment building in Shanghai, China in 2009 though, and it was all the result of shoddy engineering. The complex in which the building was located consisted of a total of 11 similar structures, and although it wasn't open to the public yet, close to 500 of the units had already been sold. The construction practices and regulations in China are known to be less sophisticated and rigorous than in other parts of the developed world, and this incident is a good indication of how that can go wrong. Buyers immediately started requesting their money back, and confidence in the project as a whole pretty much dropped to rock bottom, no pun intended. 5. Tropicana Field fail. Sometimes construction projects seem doomed from the beginning. This is what many thought about the Tampa Bay Rays Tropicana Field in Florida since its construction, since it has been the source of more than one strange and dangerous incident. During a game in 2011, shards of glass fell down onto areas of the field after a baseball hit a light bulb and shattered it. The problem with the field is that there are catwalks which hang much lower than they should for a baseball field, running the circumference of the ceiling, and the light fixtures also hang lower than would be ideal. This has led to many balls colliding with various parts of the structure and occasionally has caused the lights to break and rain glass down on teams and paying customers. 4. John Hancock Tower. If you're a fan of the Final Destination movies, you'll likely remember the scene where a person on the sidewalk below a large skyscraper is crushed by a falling glass panel. Well, this actually happened, sort of. The John Hancock Tower in Boston was built between 1968 and 1976. And was the first to use a certain type of innovative blue reflective glass panel for the building's exterior. This gave it an iconic look, but also came with a rather unpleasant side effect. Some of these panels had a nasty habit of coming loose when the winds exceeded 45 miles per hour, and would crash to the ground after falling hundreds of feet in some cases. Police actually had to close surrounding streets when the winds reached 45 miles per hour. Plywood was known to adorn the spots where glass panes used to be, and it was often referred to as Plywood Ranch, Plywood Palace, and the world's tallest plywood building during this time. All 10,344 glass panels were eventually replaced. 3. Citigroup Center. When you're given the opportunity to design a building which will adorn the New York City skyline, it seems obvious that you would put everything you have into it. You do your best to think of everything, because in many cases this will end up being the biggest project of your career. However, some people seem to approach these kinds of things in a much more relaxed manner, and that nearly led to a catastrophic disaster in the case of structural engineer William Le Mesurier and his work on the Citigroup Center building. After doing the bare minimum amount of work to ensure that the building could handle wind load according to New York City law, Le Mesurier patted himself on the back for a job well done. However, after the building was completed, mistakes in the math were pointed out to the engineer and his firm, and it was discovered that the building was far from structurally sound. Severe enough winds on one side of the building would drastically increase the load on the rest of the building and would likely bring it down. For more than 3 months, teams worked through the night to reinforce the building and ensure that it wouldn't come down. And at one point, emergency evacuation procedures were drawn up, not just for the building itself, but for the neighborhood in which it was situated. Luckily, the reinforcements were successful, but the company kept the initial failure secret for more than 20 years afterward. 2. The Chernobyl disaster. It's hard to put together a list of engineering fails without including the most disastrous event in the history of nuclear power, the Chernobyl accident. This event is so prolific that it's largely considered to be the yardstick against which similar disasters are measured to this day, and it has caused a worldwide skepticism of nuclear power, which is still in effect now. The plant was originally finished in 1977, and the disaster took place just about a decade later in 1986. During a test on the plant's ability to keep coolant pumps running during a loss of power, safety systems which would have been running were turned off. The reactor was then taken down to about 25% of its capacity. But in actuality, the reactor fell below 1% of its output potential. An attempt was made to slowly raise the power levels back up, but a surge caused a chain reaction which led to the violent explosion and the rupture of the reactor's fuel sources. The fires lasted for more than 10 days, and the cleanup effort led to serious health issues for hundreds of people, and at least 31 lives were lost. The site is still abandoned to this day, and background radiation levels continue to be much higher than they should be. 1. Challenger Space Shuttle. Since the 1960s, the United States space program has been a crowning jewel in the portfolio of the nation, a shining example of what American innovation can accomplish. However, not everything always goes as smoothly as the moon landing, and mistakes do happen. Unfortunately, on January 28, 1986, those mistakes cascaded into one of the largest disasters in the history of engineering and space travel as a whole when the Challenger space shuttle exploded as it attempted to exit the atmosphere. The entire crew of 7 was lost. What's worse, the disaster also took the life of a teacher named Krista McAuliffe, who was aboard the shuttle as the inaugural flight of the Teachers in Space program. The accident was the result of an O-ring that was used to seal a joint not being able to withstand the unusually cold temperatures of the launch day. The temperatures in Cape Canaveral, Florida that day were below freezing. Bob Ebling, an engineer who worked on the project, had tried to get NASA to listen to him about the possibility of the rings failing. Unbelievably, he told his wife the night before that it was going to blow up. This incident shook the faith of the American people in what had up until that point been seen as an infallible part of our culture. After the tragedy, no other teachers were sent into space as part of the Teachers in Space program, and the program was canceled in 1990. Only be the result of rushing to finish them and impress the world. A great example of this is the Burj Khalifa, a building which currently holds the title of tallest building in the world, and was intended to be an example of what the Middle East can accomplish. The building is from entire bridge collapses to national tragedy. Today we look at 11 crazy engineering fails. 11. Too large for the city's sewage system to adequately handle its needs. So currently, the waste produced by the 35,000 residents of the building is trucked out each and every day, to the tune of about 7 tons per trip. This is pretty crazy to consider, since the Burj Khalifa. Dubai seems to be a boomtown in the last decade, but there's a bit of a seedy underside which many people don't know about. Behind the flashy cars, huge towers, and rich super residents, there are some serious problems with some of the buildings, which Khalifa is supposed to be a shining beacon of modern architectural accomplishment. 10. Tacoma Narrows Bridge. The curious case of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge is something that any structural engineer and architect would do well to read about. Originally